Control issues, the struggle with uncertainty in an unpredictable world. There are many demands to college life. To be sure, there's a wide variety of rich personal and interpersonal experiences in college, and there's also a great deal of stress related to pursuing the goals that bring students to college. While there are many dimensions of life that are stressful for college students, depending on their unique life experiences, one dimension in particular that most students have in common is the pursuit of success. There's a mindset that is increasingly emphasized in the culture of many college campuses and society in general, especially in more competitive settings. That mindset involves a pursuit of success with an emphasis on the need for certainty. Unfortunately, because success is pursued in a culture that mandates certainty, many college students have difficulty dealing with the reality of uncertainty. It isn't your fault, and it's not likely that there is any one reason to target for blame. But one thing seems clear. When it comes to striving for a satisfying and successful life, the fear of not reaching one's goals leaves many students struggling in a way that can be both painful and scary. What occurs with all of this uncertainty and the difficulty handling it is that control seeking becomes the primary way of relating to life and the world, in a way that is temporarily reassuring, but ultimately unrelenting and distressing. Pursuing success is stressful, almost by definition, simply because students approach that pursuit in an all-or-nothing manner that is more about avoiding a vaguely defined failure than striving towards a nuanced understanding of success. Whether concerned with success in terms of their academic performance, social standing, or career and life planning, it feels critical to have all of this under a confident sense of control. I need to maintain a high GPA, and it has to be among the top in my class, and it must earn good letters of recommendation, so I can get into a good graduate school or land an impressive internship or job. And all of this has to do with this unrelenting need to make sure that I'm going to be safe and secure. I need financial security, but it has to be intrinsically satisfying, and it must come with an enjoyable lifestyle, so I can maintain a life of comfort and pleasure, so I can make sure that I'm safe and secure. And then when it comes to relationship concerns, I need a friend group. Then I'll need a close or a best friend, and eventually I must have someone to be in love with, which must last and be fulfilling and exciting and all of these intense pressures, so I don't have to worry about ending up alone. Control, control, control. The challenge is then to understand and recognize when these control issues begin dictating your life, so that you can begin addressing the pain and fear that this need for control can produce. I need to make sure that. That is the mindset of someone struggling with control issues. And these usually show up in similar ways for most people, with a shift from an enjoyment of being themselves to a mandate of always productively doing things that are impressive, with the shift toward evaluating themselves as good only if there is a visible evidence and or accomplishments, usually that can be measured in numbers, and an oversimplifying life into extremities, or this all or nothing thinking. Are you a human being or a human doing? Of course, the demands of college life require us to be active in pursuing goals. And with the demands of papers and exams, resume building, and establishing friendships, being very passive about life can lead to some problems. However, one can be productive and still relate to oneself as an individual who is inherently worthy and comprised of many dimensions. And only some of these dimensions demand getting things done. A human being in its most complete self can be successful and productive without constant fear and urgency about success. A human being is able to focus on the present as a legitimate and valuable place and time to be, not necessarily linked to the future, and carrying an appreciating rather than an evaluating perspective. A human being is able to value the self as an individual by virtue of existing relationships in which they are valued, and by appreciating one's past accomplishments and enjoying one's current efforts by virtue of having genuine interest in them, and by recognizing the value of time spent alone in one's own company, being with yourself rather than all by yourself. There are certainly some persuasive reasons to focus more on doing than on being. Those who hold this focus tend to be quite accomplished with a long history of achievements. They tend to be highly regarded by peers and figures in their lives that assign them grades or praise. Teachers and professors are impressed. Families and extended family members are proud, and the communities they come from approve of them. But to live life as a human doing has some significant disadvantages. A human doing is unable to surrender a focus on the future, always held hostage by the next thing they must be evaluated on, from physical appearance to impressive academics. Because it's difficult to know what exactly will earn approval or applause, human doings are constantly assessing whether what they're doing in the present will secure them a satisfying future. Then life becomes an obligation, something one must do, and it's difficult to get a peaceful sense of self-worth without looking at what has been accomplished. Not surprisingly, when praise and appreciation by others does come, the human being experiences it all with skepticism. It wasn't legitimately earned, or it's only temporary. Unless I keep achieving, I will lose it. Others tend to view a human doing as very competitive. Usually this is accurate, but the competition of the human doing experiences is against his or herself and exceptionally high standards. In fact, a human doing will likely regard others highly for less than their own achievement. They can see the worth in others independent of doing, but not in themselves. For a human doing, worth only comes with more doing. This is why the human doing is often simply exhausted. Physically, psychologically, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. And what a human doing most needs, to rest, feels dangerous. It's a promise of feeling good that they are simply too afraid to trust. Instead, only those things that are tangible and visibly really count. In fact, most of the time, only the things that can be evaluated in some way that can actually be counted with numbers are permitted to determine whether feeling good about yourself is justified. Your grades, the number of pounds I weigh, how many times he calls, the number of honors and awards I've received. While these visible markers of success would be reassuring for anyone, something is happening in that many college students go from enjoying these visible markers of success to needing them in order to feel any confidence about themselves as worthy human beings. All the while, the very things that are sought, the very things that drive the need for so much control to begin with, cannot be measured in numbers. The things that count the most can't be counted. The amount of dignity I have, how pretty I am, how strong I can be, how intelligent I am, how much love I have in my life, how happy I can be. And thus these things are never realized and enjoyed. They don't count unless they can be counted. And the counting never reaches the point of being enough. Never good enough. never good. The term control issues translates into a relentless pursuit of certainty. Another way to increase one's chances of things being under control is to reduce the number of different possibilities. In other words, it's easier to predict or manage 2 things than 4 or 12 or 3,993 things. With life being so random at times, simply assigning all of these conceivable possibilities into all or nothing, black or white, and good or bad, makes things seem more manageable. Unfortunately, this leads to a trap of self-loathing, with life limited to extremes, when one realizes that he or she or Z is not perfect. They have only one other conclusion to reach. If I'm not perfect, I must be worthless. What often results from a life in which control issues dictate the perceptions and actions of a human being is psychological distress. With a satisfying life in constant doubt, a greater and greater need to control everything believed to lead to satisfaction takes over. I must get things done. I must be impressive. I must succeed. This manner of seeking happiness, in and of itself, makes happiness seem more and more elusive. What results is a self-perpetuating spiral toward an increased need to control, which leads toward increased emotional exhaustion and greater risk for psychological difficulties. Psychological difficulties associated with an overemphasis on control seeking can emerge in various forms: disordered eating, panic or anxiety problems, alcoholism and drug abuse and drug addiction, relationship difficulties, and most of these also involve difficulties with symptoms of depression. If one were to examine the symptoms of depression as diagnosed by mental health professionals, it would not be long before these symptoms resemble the kind of pain and loneliness experienced by those who are struggling with control issues. Depression is a serious difficulty, often viewed as a medical condition and successfully treated as such. Research also shows that the most successful treatment of depression involves psychological counseling. There's a connection between what one thinks and how one acts, and thought and action in turn are connected to emotional experience. So, how one views the world is ultimately going to inform how he or she or Z thinks and acts. And the emotional reactions to these thoughts can be changed if we help revise the perceptions and assumptions which define how one operates in life. This leads to a need for a shift in our paradigms. A critical step in addressing your struggle with control issues involves not only changing each separate and specific thought that might lead to distress, but making entire paradigm shifts in one's way of thinking. Redefining the meaning assigned to life experience can make more completely and liberating and empowering changes in the person who has lost control of their attempts to control life towards certain happiness. A good place to begin is with the very symptoms of depression that those with control issues typically encounter. Simply knowing the symptoms when still in one's problematic way of thinking will simply lead to trying to stop the symptoms rather than fully grasping how they emerged from the paradigm one has been operating from. Understanding these difficulties in a more complete and more flexible framework may help to create more flexible reactions to the pain, confusion, and fear that these symptoms cause. The symptoms of depression include hopelessness, a loss of motivation or a loss of interest in normally enjoyable activities, a pervasive shift towards simplified thinking, dichotomous thinking or overgeneralization, overwhelming feelings of sadness, and suicidal ideation. If we take a look first at hopelessness, we think hopelessness means lacking hope. So one should just stop being hopeless. One should start being hopeful. That's unlikely to be helpful. In fact, it's likely to just end in more frustration when the hopelessness continues. Rather, the enemy of hope is expectation. To be hopeless is not simply lacking hope. Actually, it is resisting hope and replacing it with an expectation based on unavailable certainty. If one expects happiness because they've controlled all the things that should lead to it, and happiness remains tentative or elusive, hopelessness results naturally. Expectation is a thought based on having done the things that should lead to certainty. Hope is an emotional phenomenon, and it requires peace with uncertainty in order to exist. Loss of motivation. Loss of motivation means one has stopped doing things that one should, feeling no energy to do them. To become motivated, one must be disciplined and just do the things that they need to do. This, too, is probably an approach to loss of motivation that is under the influence of one who's overly emphasizing control. Rather, the antithesis of motivation is obligation. Motivation is an emotional phenomenon. It requires having some feelings about doing what we set out to do. Depression and control issues involve the suppression of such spontaneous emotion. Depression and control lead to inflexible ideas that we must accomplish and we must achieve. This obligation, an engine of certainty, mutes motivation by creating a life that we must live rather than a life that we get to live. Depression is also characterized by simplified thinking or all-or-nothing thinking. Simplified thinking, such as overgeneralizing and all-or-nothing thinking, are causing problems, and one should concentrate with great effort on stopping this kind of thinking. Well, approaching simplified thinking in this way is also unlikely to be helpful. Instead, the antidote to simplified thinking is welcoming change. All-or-nothing thinking and overgeneralization are founded on a need for predictability. Certain pain is more predictable than a variety of emotional possibilities, even those which may include joy, because the joy comes with no promise of being permanent. Control issues, on the other hand, involve hopelessness which, in spite of being painful, at least offers some protection from the threat of change. Overwhelming sadness, which is what we usually associate with depression, is often thought of in very simplistic terms, such as to be sad is to not be happy, and one should try to be happy. Again, that is unlikely to be helpful as a coping strategy. The solution to persistently being sad is being open to the possibilities of all spontaneous emotion. The opposite of being sad is not necessarily being happy. People struggling with overwhelming sadness often set their goal to be happy, which can be as oppressive as being sad in that it defies the full range of being human. Sadness is often not merely the absence of joy, but the absence of emotional being, which includes joy as merely one child in a family of many interdependent siblings. And of course, many who struggle with depression often also struggle with suicidal thinking. And suicide is understood as ending one's life and that it's wrong. And so one should not take one's own life and must strive to live and work through the problem that is causing suicidal thoughts. However, to approach suicidal thinking in this way is likely to lead to all of the problems being discussed here. Rather, the prevention of suicide is not simply the choice to live, but rather the permitting of life to inform one's living. Life in its completeness is a myriad of many possibilities of experiences. Sometimes it happens to us, and in some ways life seems to choose the living. Sometimes life has the control, no matter what we do. Ending suicidal thinking is often achieved by beginning to surrender some control over life and all of its possibilities. And this includes rainy and difficult days. Control. To struggle with control issues is to always try to control things in life, and this causes problems. One should stop trying to control things and let things just happen. Well, to approach control issues in this way is to actually continue to struggle with control issues. The opposite of control is trust. The solution to control issues is not giving up control. Rather, it is pursuing and allowing the phenomena that is always there, but in the other direction, trust. To control something is to make sure that something desirable becomes true. To trust something is to believe without proof that it already is true, and to enjoy that. Trust is a difficult thing to have in one's life when so much of one's focus has been on making sure that trust wasn't even allowed to enter into the equations of life. One cannot simply decide to trust. One must structure life in such a way that trust happens. We don't accomplish trust. We realize we have it. And trust is interpersonal in nature. Ultimately, the most significant reward of shifting away from control toward trust is in the human connections that are possible with trust. In these interpersonal encounters we find, usually, that we are not alone and that we can see gifts and frailties in others as acceptable, ultimately finding them acceptable in ourselves. Then, we don't accomplish loving and accepting ourselves. We discover that we can love and accept ourselves. Perhaps the most important structure in a confident and satisfied life is balance. In reality, we cannot realistically give up control completely. We need to attend to the practical demands of life. And so we must attend to the obstacles we face and the responsibilities that we carry. However, we can be vigilant and allow a balance to exist in life between control towards certainty and trust in one's confidence, between doing and being, and learn to celebrate the spaces in between. The Sufi poet Rumi once wrote, "Out beyond ideas of right thinking and wrong thinking, there is a field. I'll meet you there." In the millions of colors between black and white, in the myriad perspectives between right and wrong, and the multitude of possibilities between all and nothing, there is such vastness of life. Spending time contemplating, even playing in that field that represents all the space between the extremities of an over-controlled life, will provide a structure strong enough for trust to emerge. It will reward you with the joy of more complete living. Life is loaded with contradictions, some of which occur within the confusing logic the world seems to operate on at times. Sometimes we just can't understand why things are the way they are. At other times, an apparent contradiction is actually a paradox, a combination of seemingly opposite ideas that, when understood in relationship to each other, give way to a more profound truth. My blindness provided me with my best vision. I began living only after accepting my death. One can only possess love by giving it away. She only found happiness when she stopped searching for it. Showing weakness is often the sign of greatest strength. Enjoy the spontaneous present. You know, when folks used to ask me why I climb the mountain, I'd always just say, because it's there, or to get to the top. Then something changed. I started noticing the leaves and the different shades of tree bark. I started to feel the ground as I walked. The wind came into the picture, the pebbles, the little creatures. It all became so vivid. So now when folks ask me why I climb the mountain, I tell them it's simply because I love the mountain. Hunger for control involves a persistent focus on the future. With such a focus, the present is only acknowledged to the extent that it will lead to the future you want so bad. Getting to the top of the mountain is the only thing that counts, as if there aren't many things on the mountain as you're climbing to enjoy and appreciate. Being aware of the now, the moment you're living in, creates a mindset that is conducive to trust because it offers an awareness that sometimes life is already good.